We are ready to begin.
Ready to begin. Thank you, Dr. Lathis. I appreciate it. Okay, so this is part 2. I think I'm going to make this the last part of the Matzah, machine Matzah controversy. It feels a bit strange talking about Matzah and Lagoiner, but it's still Torah. So in the reference sheet, I just gave a very quick, brief review of the basic historical controversy. The first Matzah machine was invented by a Frenchman in 1838. It became popular in Germany, and then in 1857 and 1858 it moved to Krakow. Okay, then entered Galicia in Lemberg. Who was the Rabbi of Lemberg? Of Lemberg was the Shalom Meisher, Yosef Shalom Levinson. Okay, he had the backing of the Archlener, which was not surprising. The Archlener was one of the leading German rabbis. Now, they viewed the machine function. It had the approval of the Shalom Meishiv, Yosef Shaul, and his brother-in-law Mordechai Ettinger was very upset about it, and he went to Shlomo Kluger, and then Shlomo Kluger and Mordechai Ettinger got support from many Polish rabbis that opposed the machine, the Chidusharim, the Divrei Chaim, the Ramalanda, the Technischer Rebbe of Meir Arbach, of Kalish, the Merbina, the Yeshua Heschel of Lublin, the Vermeitish of Warsaw, and they put out a collection of these truvas opposing the machine matzah. They put it out in a sefer called Medol Beis Yisrael in 1859, and that same year, the Shalom Meishiv wrote a Bittul Maida. Okay, so what we saw yesterday, that the real reason why they were so against the machine is because they wanted to oppose any form of innovation. They said if we open the door to innovation, that brings more innovation, and then who knows what could happen. That gives an opening, a segue for the reform. And that's the real reason, I believe, and I think if you want to, we talked about that last year, we talked about it at length. Now what they tried to do is they tried to come up with some halachic reasoning why they considered why the machine matzah was chametz. The Divrei Chaim said, I have many reasons, I'm not going to share it. It's a takana, it's an enactment, it's a gzeira. It's chametz, and I'm not telling you why. He said, I'll briefly mention that Rabbi Ettinger, the brother-in-law of the Shalom Meishiv, testified that there's lots of dough stuck in crevices and the different mechanical parts, and that makes everything chametz. Okay, so that's the main reason. Everybody agrees that was the main basis for opposing the machine. That's what Rosh Shlomo Kluger mentioned in Siman Aleph, Medel basis, so number 1 on the reference sheet, with Mordechai Ettinger, number 2 on the reference sheet. Okay, number 3, the Divrei Chaim said, EF Shaliver Hated, and it's impossible to clean this machine. Number 4 on the reference sheet, the Rav of Warsha, of Dover Shemaizlish, Eber Chashash Nipnei Abatzei. Even the Divrei Malkiel, who was very medical, we talked about the Divrei Malkiel, the Rav of Lamja, Malkiel Steinhardt, wrote to Rabbi Rosenfeld, wrote of St. Louis, about a half a century, about 40 years after this. This is a little bit of a later tshuva. Okay, I'd say about maybe 50 years after the main tshuva, after the main controversy erupted in Poland. Again, even though the Divrei Malkiel was mashal machine matzah, but he did warn Rabbi Rosenfeld, please do make sure that it's 100% possible to clean the machine. If you can't clean the machine, it's a major problem. Now, number 6, you see the Chazal, or the Rishayim and the Achrayim were very concerned about the possibility of dough getting stuck. In fact, there's an interesting Trumas Hadeshin that's brought by the Beis Yosef in Tafel Gimel, that even the bags, right, that were used to store the flour, the Trumas Hadeshin warned not to use bags that were liable to have dough or flour get stuck. Why? Because these bags often became wet. In fact, that they had to launder these bags, so sometimes they were still a bit wet. So they said, don't use bags that could have anything get stuck in there, which could eventually cause the dough to become chametz. Number 7 in the reference sheet, right? It's a Gemara Mesachim Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. What does the Gemara Mesachim say? Let me just read the Gemara, just a bold section, just to get a bit of a snippet. If since there's a prohibition against having designs on the matzah. Today we have these thin matzahs, okay? They're like crackers. But the original matzah was like a pita, okay? And often when they made pitas, they used to make designs. They used to carve out the design of a bird or something else, nice. So the Gemara says that that's not allowed. The woman that's making this design is going to tarry. in her work, and that might cause the matzah to become chametz.
What?
Terribly. It might take her a bit of time to make her design, and in the meantime, the pita could become chametz. Now, the Gemara says, the bottom line of the Gemara is, I put it in bold, bakers, they used to have molds, okay, like cookie cutters, right, where they used to be able to make the designs quickly. They would take the mold, they would press it in, and they would get a design. So the maskana of the Gemara is that is okay. Okay? In other words, at home, a woman doesn't have such sophisticated cookie cutters or whatever have you, or tools that could make the designs, and therefore it's liable to become chametz. But the bakers, they have a special system where they have a certain tool, a cookie cutter, or a mold, however you want to call it, but they would be able to make these designs without having to delay more than necessary, and therefore the bakers are allowed to make these designs. Okay, that's the Gemara of Sachem Daf Lamed Zayin. The Maharil in Hilchos Afiyas Pesach contradicts the Gemara. Okay, first of all, that's number 9 in the reference sheet. Let's see what the Maharil has to say about matzah baking. First of all, while you bake the matzah, you have to look at the rolling pins. Right, you have to look at the tools that make holes in the matzah. You have to examine them to make sure that there's no dough stuck in them, and that it has to be periodically cleaned. Okay, so all the tools that are used for making matzah have to be cleaned frequently to make sure that nothing becomes chametz. Okay, fair enough. Nothing, no problem with that. Even the sakin, even the knife that they use to cut the dough has to be cleaned often to make sure that nothing becomes chametz. Says the Mario, it seems to be the opposite of the Gemara. Aim at siring matzahs b'tfus. Right? He says that you're not allowed to make pictures or shapes or designs on the matzah with a tfus, right? With a molder, with a cookie cutter. So we're going to be using cookie cutters or other tools to make designs or shapes. The dough might get stuck into these tools, and it might become chametz. Now, this is very peculiar. The Gemara said that the bakers are okay. They can do it because they could make these designs very quickly. They have the tools to do so. The Gemara says exactly the opposite. Don't use any tools. Right? Any tool that you use is liable to have dough stuck in there. Okay? So how do we reconcile this? First of all, the Ramah in Tufin Tes does quote this Mariel. Okay? And the Magen Avraham immediately asks the question. The Magen Avraham in Taf Sam Sif Kardan Gimel, number 12 on the reference sheet. Let's read what the Magen Avraham asks. Because the Maharil says the Asulas is b'tfus. You're not allowed to use tools to make designs or shapes. Because dough is liable to get into these tools and cause the matzah to become chametz. So ask the Magen Avraham, how could he say that? The Gemara said explicitly that it's fine to use tools. The tools that the Gemara was talking about was like a hairbrush or a comb. Just was able to make holes. So he says what happened is, I guess they used to use, they take a comb that had, I'm just guessing, it's this theory that they had the shape of a bird or some other beautiful shape, I don't know what else, and they would stamp it down onto the dough, you'd make a whole bunch of holes, and then you get a design or shape. So that's okay because no dough is liable to get stuck into the pins. Pins are pins, there's nowhere for the dough to get stuck. However, he says they used to make cakes or cookies, sweet things, so they used to use another type of tfus, another type of tool. So that's not okay. That's what the Magen Avraham says. Okay? So when the Gemara permitted using tools, it's only the type of tools that are like a comb. Like pins, you go straight in, that's the only tools you're allowed to use. But the type of tfus, the type of mold that's used for mine metika, to make sweet cakes and breads or whatever have you, that you can't use. So comes with Pinchazev, one of the leading Polish Rabbanim, in Meidola Beis Yisrael, and he says, since the Magen Avraham said that you're not allowed to use tools, we're not bikiyim, we're not expert as to which tools are allowed to be used for the matzah baking, which tools are not allowed to be used for the matzah baking, so therefore the machine is not allowed. Okay? We don't know if this machine falls into the same bracket of the tools that according to the Magen Avraham and the Gemara is not allowed. Okay? So that was the first argument against using the machine matzah.
What's the reason why?
Well, probably what the Magen Avraham meant to say with the minimitika, the type of tools that they were using for the minimitika were the type of tools that had crevices, that are liable to have cracks, tools that present an issue of dough getting stuck somewhere and causing the matzah to become chametz.
So it's basically the same way as before.
Yeah, so basically what he's saying is so that the machine matzah is no better than the tools that according to the Maril and Magen Avraham are not allowed. Okay, so that's in other words, even if, Pinchas is making the argument as follows, even if everything is clean, right? But you see, you're not allowed to use any tools that are even liable to have dough stuck in there. So therefore, even if you do clean the machine, but the machine is a tool which is liable to have dough stuck in the crevices and the different mechanical pieces, so therefore you're not allowed to use it. Okay? Now, along the same lines, Rav Shlomo Kluger made the same argument. He said, look, the Gemara Pesachim Daf Lamed Vav Manal number 14 in the reference, she says you're not allowed to use lukewarm water when you make matzah. So the Gemara says, why not? When they used to make menachos, they used to make bread offerings in the Beis HaMikdash, they did use lukewarm water, and the menachos in the Beis HaMikdash are not either allowed to become chametz. So the Gemara says, in the Beis HaMikdash there was reason. They were able to work very fast, so therefore there was no concern about anything becoming chametz. But for the private individual, right, we don't know that everybody could be relied upon to be fast enough to make sure things go well. So therefore, we don't lukewarm water. Lukewarm water is very liable to make the dough become chametz. So what comes with Shlomo Kluger, by dough the basis also an aleph, you see that even if something won't necessarily make something chametz, but there's a greater possibility, there's a greater capacity for chametz to come as a result, the chacham wouldn't allow for its usage. So Shlomo wanted to make the argument like this. If we don't allow the use of lukewarm water, even though the lukewarm water doesn't necessarily make chametz, it's just more liable to make chametz, so by the same token, you can't use the machine because the machine has the capacity to have pieces of dough stuck in the crevices and the mechanical pieces, so therefore you're not allowed to use it. Okay, that's the argument. Now, what's the counter argument? It's very simple. The argument doesn't really get off the ground because they use rolling pins, right? They use knives. You see that the Shulchan Aruch, right, in Tov Nun Tes had to describe the kelim shemetaklim b'matzah. There were tools, there were utensils that they used in order to make matzah. So maybe you're not allowed to make tools. The answer is that the necessary tools that you need to make matzah, like a rolling pin, and I don't know what it's called, that the tool that you use to make holes in the matzah, whatever tools are necessary, or the pen, the shovel that you use to pick up the dough, these are necessary tools. That's allowed. The cookie cutters, okay, maybe you shouldn't be using cookie cutters because cookie cutters are not necessary, especially cookie cutters that are liable to have dough stuck in them. So this is the argument that the proponents of the machine matzah made. What is the machine? The machine is basically a rolling pin that you turn with a wheel, right, that rolls the dough onto a table, so it's no different than the rolling pin. In other words, what's the issue? The issue is that you're using a rolling pin with a wheel, right? That's the issue, right? So therefore, they argue that it's not an issue. Again, the opponents of the machine matzah argue that no, it's already more sophisticated machine. There are more parts. There's mechanical pieces there, so therefore it's not allowed.
Rav, can I ask, did any of the Rabbanim from Germany or Pressburg, did any of them give answers? Because it's a direct attack on them.
In my Dala Beis Yisrael, let me repeat Dr. Lez's question, the German rabbis and the rabbis of Slovakia had been sanctioning the machine matzah already for almost half a century. What were their replies? So the answer is yes, they gave replies. The Ksav Sofer, right, printed a tshuva which was included in the Bittul Maidah, that was printed by Rabbi Nathanson, and he explains, if we get to there, hopefully we'll be able to see the tshuva, what the Ksav Sofer wrote, and the Tiferes Yisrael and the Arthur. The answer to the question is definitely yes. Okay, so the part number 4 in the reference sheet, right? Let's look at number 16 in the reference sheet. The Gemara Masachim Daf Mendeis, right? The Mishnah says, the Gemara says, it doesn't mean she shouldn't take her hands out of the oven. A woman would want to have her hands in the oven. Although I remember when I came to Israel, my friend said, I have to take you to Chobagrippus. So you get the best lafas, right? There's a little hole somewhere in the grippus, right? And we saw, he makes, when you learn about the Tanur, Masechah Shabbos, Gemara says, B'dias HaPas a chachma, there's a certain skill to peel the lafas off of the oven because the dough used to be stuck against the interior walls of the oven. So the way to peel off the lafas was a skill. So that's what we saw in Rechav Grippus. No sign, nothing. You just see somebody, he sticks his hands into the oven and literally pulls the lafas off of the oven. So you saw it also, okay? So I'm wondering if that's what the Gemara means. It says, a woman, she should never have her hands leave the oven. I don't know if it means that the woman needs to actually put their hands in the oven, or it could mean that the Gemara is not talking so accurately. The Gemara is talking about the job that's being done in conjunction with an oven, okay? What it means to say a woman has to have her hands in the dough the whole time. That's what it means to say. She shouldn't withdraw even for a moment. That's what Rashi says. When the woman made the matzah, she has to be kneading the dough. She has to be dealing with the dough constantly, perpetually. It's also the pasuk of the Torah, Shulchan Aruch, and number 18 on your reference sheet. Number 19, as long as the dough is constantly kneaded, as long as the dough is not being left below, it doesn't become chametz. Number 20 in the reference sheet, this is where the Gemara seems to contradict what it said previously. The Gemara says, Betzek HaCharesh. What is a Betzek HaCharesh? Betzek is the dough that you suspect became chametz. You're not sure if it became 11 or not. So what does the Gemara say?
Why is it called Cheresh?
Why is it called So Rashi says, Betzek HaCharesh, number 21 of the reference, Cheresh means you can't hear. Which means to say somebody who can't hear is oblivious as to what's going on. So therefore we'll call it Betzek HaCharesh because it's a dough with regards to which we don't know if it's chametz or not. Okay? So, how do we know if something, when must we assume that the dough became chametz? If it's been left untouched, right, for the amount of time during which one can walk from Migdal Nunya to Tveria, which is a mil. A mil is approximately a kilometer. Okay? The accepted timing for that is 18 minutes. Although today everybody says 18 minutes, it wasn't so simple. There's a sheet of 22 minutes, 24 minutes according to the Rambam. Okay, but the accepted sheet of the Trumas Hadeshin, that's 18 minutes. Which means that if the dough has been left untouched for 18 minutes, it's assumed to have become chametz, or at least you need to suspect that it became chametz. Exactly. So now we have the difficulty. Previously you said that a woman has to be kneading the dough constantly, which would seem to indicate that dough is likely to become chametz, even if it was left untouched for a moment. Yet here the Gemara is saying 18 minutes. So the Rosh really deals with the difficulty, and the Rosh gives a very important principle. Number 22 in the reference sheet, Hilchos Pesach B'Tzar. There's a short compilation of halachas of Pesach from the Rosh and Psachim. Says the Rosh that once the hands make contact with the dough, that sets the chametz process into effect, and therefore once the dough has made contact with the hands, it becomes much hotter, and therefore if you leave it even just for a moment, it becomes chametz, which means to say like this. Before the dough makes contact with the hands, let's say it was mixed using tools, and it could be left untouched for 18 minutes, you don't have to be concerned it became chametz. But once somebody puts their hands on that dough, and then it's left untouched, it can become chametz even for a moment. Because once the hands touch the dough, it makes the dough very hot, and therefore could become chametz in just a moment.
The dough that was talking about the Gemara between Tveria
must be that a dough before the hands make contact, which is a bit of a doiche.
How is it done?
Yeah, maybe using tools. Well, let's read the Rosh again, number 22 in the reference sheet. A woman should not leave the dough untouched until it enters the oven. So she has to be kneading it constantly. As long as the dough is still being kneaded, it won't become chametz. After the woman already kneaded the dough and she touched the dough, and therefore the dough started to become hot because she touched it. If you leave it even for just a moment, it becomes chametz. Comes Mordechai Zev, number 23. How did he describe the chametz? This is extraordinary, the way that Mordechai Zev describes it. Almost hard to believe. They would flatten it, they would hit it with a tool to make it flat, and then they'd put it into the machine until it became very thin. The job of the machine was to make the dough very thin, so it could become matzah. Okay, then you leave it on the table. It was very clear from Mordechai Zev that the kneading process was done by hand. Which means to say that at least the machine as it existed during this controversy in 1859, they were still kneading the dough by hand, and only then did they put it in the machine. Okay? So now, right, came along. First of all, I mentioned some other points. 18 minutes is not always the amount of time, right, that we have to be concerned about. Sometimes even less. We already have the Mordechai, number 25 in the reference sheet. Brennan's Taf Reish. The Fi Yisra Nachamimus Mar Lahachnitz. When the Gemara said 18 minutes, it was talking about a room of average temperature. But if you have a room which is exceptionally hot, then the dough could become chametz in even less than 18 minutes.
Which is always the case with the bakeries.
That's right. That's why today, in the Matzah bakeries today, they have the mazganim, the air conditioning is blasting to make it as cold as possible. Okay? But what did they do before that air conditioning? They probably still do this today. They would keep the oven at a distance from the area where they were kneading. So let's say they would have them kneading in, let's say, one room, and then they have an opening immediately into another room where they would bake it. Because if you start dealing with the dough too close to the oven, then something could become chametz in just a moment, right? So 18 minutes isn't a constant figure. It's only for a room of average temperature. It's also in our guys' mind, it's talking about a room where there's no fire burning. Or if there's no reason why this room is hotter than other rooms. The hotter room is, the faster the dough becomes chametz. Okay, that's what the Ramban often tests. If basis, there's another big machlokes Rishonim. Right? When we say 18 minutes, what happens if every minute the dough is kneaded? So the dough is kneaded, then there's a pause for one moment, a minute, and then the dough is kneaded again. You amalgamate all the breaks in between.
You said once you stop, it's a problem.
Right, so according to some Rishonim, right, you knead the dough, you wait a minute, and then you knead it again, the clock starts to tick from the beginning. Which means to say you start counting the 18 minutes from the beginning.
Would you stop?
So you can do that for the entire day. You can do that for hours and hours, according to some Rishonim. You knead it, you wait 17 minutes, and you knead again. So you start the count of the 18 minutes over again, right? And then you can continue to do this the whole day. The Gemara talks about a leaky roof. It was leaking the entire time. So the Gemara says it doesn't become chametz. So they based on this Gemara, they ruled that every single time the dough is kneaded, you start to count the 18 minutes from the beginning. Other Rishonim don't learn that way. Other Rishonim rule that no, you do amalgamate the breaks together, which means to say if you knead it and you take a minute break, and then you need to take a minute break, you add up all the breaks. And if all the breaks equal to 18 minutes, then you have to be concerned that the dough is chametz. That's the machlokes Rishonim. The Ramah rules stringently. You have to bake the matzah as fast as you possibly can. You have to be concerned that the breaks between each kneading add up to equal 18 minutes.
What about the one day that says that as soon as you stop, it becomes chametz immediately?
That's after the hands have gotten.
We're talking about
That's right. So we're talking about even without the hands. We have two concerns. One concern is the concern of the Rosh, that once the hands make contact, once the kneading is begin, then we don't use the 18-minute criterion anymore. And then something could become chametz even immediately. And in addition to that, some Rishonim learn that you add up the moments, you add up the breaks between the different kneadings. Okay? So that's the ruling of the Mishnah. Board number 28 on your reference sheet says, number 29, he says, what prevents something from becoming chametz? Right? We said as long as you're kneading, the thing doesn't become chametz. If a woman is constantly kneading, right? Perpetually, she's kneading, then it won't become chametz even if she continues to do that for hours and hours. Says Rav Shlomo Kluger, that's only when you knead it with the hands, because the hands, you put a lot of energy, right? When somebody kneads the dough, right, he puts a lot of force into the kneading. So we know that could prevent the dough from becoming chametz. That the machine, how do I know that the machine kneads or presses the dough with the same level of force? So maybe it doesn't prevent the dough from becoming chametz. That was the argument that Shlomo Kluger wanted to make.
Even the Gemara said what he put.
That's right, very good, beautiful. Avi Mashiach just made a very beautiful point. Even the Gemara says, even tipois, even dripping, even a leaky roof prevents it from becoming chomesh. Yeah, so therefore there's no reason to machadish svaris. It's very good, excellent, very well said, pointed out. Good. So therefore, Enechanami, that's a very valid point. It's hard to buy with Shlomo Kluger's argument. Okay? Anyways, part number 5. This is the biggest topic of the Mashim Matzah, and also this has the most relevance for today's day and age. Can you use Matzah on the night of Seder? Okay? That's a very relevant topic. So number 30 on the reference sheet is to shmartem es hamatzos. What does that mean? You should safeguard the matzahs. Now, according to the Pshuto Shemikra, it means you should safeguard the mitzvah, or you should keep the mitzvah of eating matzah for future generations, right? Mm-hmm. That's what the simple Pshuto Shemikra. But you see that the Gemara in Sachem, Daf Lamed Ches Amud Beis, has a somewhat different interpretation. Shmartem es hamatzos. What is the Gemara in Sachem Lamed Ches saying? Matzah mishtameres l'shem mitzvah. Only matzah that had been safeguarded for the fulfillment of the mitzvah of matzah, even if you have a matzah, a piece of unleavened bread, but it was not safeguarded for the mitzvah of matzah, it's not valid. It's not kosher. Okay? Not only that, the Gemara Masachem the Lamed Ches goes even further. Let's read number 32 in the reference sheet. Tani Amar Rabbi Eloi Sha'al Rabbi Eliezer. I asked Rabbi Eliezer, they used to have to prepare matzahs for the bread offering. Somebody had to bring a carbon tithe and a Thanksgiving offering. Okay, so he had to bring 40 breads. 30 out of the 40 breads had to be matzah. 10 out of the 40 had to be chametz. She says, can I use the matzahs that were prepared for the tithe offering or the nazar's offering? Can I use it for the night of Pesach? So I'm not sure. He said to me, if the matzahs were baked for carbon mincha, a person cannot use them to discharge his obligation on Pesach. But if he baked them to sell them in the market, why? Because if somebody sells matzah in the market, his intention is that it should be made for whatever use the buyer intends it for. Okay, so if I use it to sell on the shuk, my intention from the get-go is that if somebody buys it for a mincha, it should be for a mincha, and if somebody buys it for Seder night, it should be kosher for Seder night. But otherwise, if somebody baked matzah with the sole intent that it should be used for a mincha, for bread offering, it's not kosher to be used to discharge the mitzvah of matzah. Okay? That's the ruling of the Gemara. Rashi says there, number 33, the matzah was not made for Seder night. It was not made to discharge the mitzvah of matzah. Rather, it was made for the zebach, for the offering. This is the basis of the Shulchan Rabbi Chai. The Shulchan Rabbi Chai is probably perhaps the earliest written work after the Talmud. Okay? The Bahag and the Shulchan Rabbi Chai lived about 400 years before the period of the Rishonim. It's a very early work. Rabbi Chai was borderline Rabban Savaroi. Okay? But the beginning of the Tchuf of the Gaonim, here he writes in Aramaic. He lived in Babel, so you see that the language that they use is Aramaic. He says that once the water goes into the flour, the matzah needs to be safeguarded for the sake of fulfilling the mitzvah. Says the Shilchus, what happens if the person safeguarding or overseeing the dough and the matzah, the baking of the matzah, was a goy, a non-Jew, or a cherish, is a deaf mute? He doesn't have full intelligence, a shaitus, and is completely insane, or a katan. They're not valid. You got that? So if somebody baked the matzah, a child baked matzah, that matzah is not kosher for Seder night. Surely if it was baked by a non-Jew, it has to be somebody who is of the age of maturity, who has full intelligence, right, and is capable of safeguarding the matzah with the intent that it should be suitable to discharge the mitzvah.
Is there a cut of age, like a bar mitzvah age?
Bar mitzvah age. Yeah, he has to be 13, he has to have 2 pubic hairs. Okay? Says the Sefer of Gedalos, the Bahag, again written more or less in the same period. The Dafka Leil Rishon, it's only the first night. How did the Bahag know that it's only the first night that we have this requirement? Because there is no requirement to eat matzah at all after the first night. Other than, as we say, that you can't use matzah that's not lishma if it wasn't made with the intent to fulfill the mitzvah. There is all the absolute obligation to eat matzah is only on the first night. So that's why Seder night, the first night of Pesach, or Chutz La'aretz, the first 2 nights, that's when you need matzah lishma. Okay? This is the ruling of the Ritz Gius, also about 1,000 years ago, a Spanish sage, very early Rishon, right at the beginning of the Rishon period. Okay. The Dafka Leil Rishon, he says the same thing is only the first night. The Torah brings this right, in Siman Tav Samach. Okay. Now, look at the Torah says the name of Haigan, the very bottom line in reference number 37. What does it say there? What does the Torah say? Rabbi Kos of Matzah Shabam Akum B'fnei Yisrael 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 Mutul Yisrael. According to Rabbi, this is a chidush. Some Rishonim agree, some Rishonim disagree, that even if a non-Jew baked matzah, if it was done in the presence of a Jew, the Jew was overseeing the baking of the matzah, that's good enough. So according to Rabbi, you wouldn't have an issue with the machine, because whatever's happening in the machine is being overseen by a Jew, and that would be good enough. So according to Rabbi, it's good enough for a Jew just to oversee the baking of the matzah. Okay? But the Rosh didn't rely on Rabbi Goyen, as the Torah quotes his father, that the Rosh actually had the minhag that he would participate in the baking of the matzah. He would knead the matzah, because that was what we saw already in the Shuldas Torah, that once the water goes into the flour, it needs to be shimur, it needs to be done with the intent for the mitzvah. But the Rosh would rely on Rabbi Goyen. He wouldn't rely on the leniency that it's good enough just for a Jew to oversee the baking of the matzah. He would be personally involved. And that's the minhag in Klal Yisrael, right? That we don't rely on a kosher Jew just overseeing the matzah baking process. Now here comes the critical point, which is very relevant to our question about machine matzahs. What happens if you had a katan, a minor, or a cheresh, definitely doing a mitzvah, but there was a Jew that stood on top of him, an adult Jew, that stood on top of him saying, do it for the mitzvah of matzah. Right? And he kept on reminding him. He told the child, or the non-Jew, or the cheresh, do it for the mitzvah of matzah. It's called Oymer al Gaba. Is that good enough? So that leads us to the Gemara Gittin, Daf Chav Beis, Amud Beis. Remember that a bill of divorce, needs to be written lishma. The scribe will be writing, the bill of divorce has to have the intent that it's going to be used for so-and-so to divorce his wife. Okay? He has to know who the husband is, he has to know who the wife is. That's the halacha, that is what is necessary to make a bill of divorce kosher. The Gemara says, even a katan, a cheresh, a shaitan, the same person, it's fine as long as a Jew that's reached the age of maturity, that's of full intelligence, is on top of him and telling him, do this for the sake of so-and-so who's divorcing his wife. Okay? So that's where the concept of Oymer al Gaba comes from. The Gemara Gittin Chav Beis. The Gemara in Chulin says, but that's saying, no, there are certain people, a child is not suitable to shecht an animal, but it's good enough for a Jew, an adult, to oversee the shechita, to oversee the slaughtering. Says the Gemara, how could that be? How could it be good enough for an adult Jew to oversee the shechita? So it must be that this is the shita of Nasan that holds that shechita doesn't need kavanah. Okay? In other words, if the Mishnah qualified a katan, a child, to shecht an animal, and the Mishnah considered it good enough for an adult to oversee it, must be that you don't need kavanah for shechita, and that must be like the opinion that says even if you threw a knife without intending to shecht and shechted the animal, then it's kosher. That's the shita of Nasan. Asks Tosis a very obvious question. Why did you have to say that this is Rav Nasan's shita that you don't need a tent for shechita? Didn't we learn that when it comes to a get that it's good enough to have somebody oversee the writing of the get? That's the question of Tosis. So Tosis gives two answers. One answer the Tosis gives for shechita, you don't need kavanah, you just need somebody there to make sure that it's not, here Oymer al Gaba doesn't mean that he's telling him the whole time, have kavanah, have kavanah, have kavanah. Oymer al Gaba just means he's watching, he's supervising, he's just looking to make sure that everything is okay. So when the Gemara talked about somebody just watching the shechita, he wasn't talking about somebody telling the child, make the shechita lishma, make the shechita lishma. That's not what we're talking about. He was just looking to see that everything was done okay, and indeed that has to be only the opinion of Rav Nosson or hope that you don't need Kabbalah. But when the gadol, when the adult stands over the person who's doing the act and telling him the entire time, have the right intent, that's much better, and that's fine. Or the other answer that Tosfos gives, that no, Maisa mochichin Allah. What does that mean? That when it comes to a get, they're taking a piece of parchment, they're writing up an entire text, right? They're talking about a certain man who's divorcing his wife. So everything that's happening acts as an automatic reminder as to why we're doing what we're doing. It's called Maisa Mechichem Allah. Exactly. So therefore, when is Oymer al-Gabel good enough? When is it good enough to have an adult tell the person have Lishma? When you have the extra help of the ceremony, you have the extra help of what's happening to remind the person that this is being done for the sake of divorcing a person's wife. So therefore, it's good enough when a bill of divorce is being written, it's good enough to have an adult tell the person the entire time, have Lishma, because the child is being reminded, and the child also has the physical reminder, or the maisa, or what he's doing is very unique, right? But the things that he's doing helps him understand that he's doing this for the act of a divorce, so that's when it's good enough. But a maisa shchita, you don't have that, it's not such a unique act, it doesn't stand to remind the person. I just want to... Okay. So
we do need them to look oversee shchita, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's two answers of Tosfos. If you look at the Shut Rashba number 43 in the Shut Rashba, look at the bold section, because this is the way the Rashba rules, number 43. The Rashba says it's logical to me, shakol talabachacha, whether it's good enough to have a supervisor reminding the invalid actor, the child, the insane person, the deaf mute, whoever it is, right? If you want it to be effective to have a gadol standing on top of him, telling him to do the right thing, you need a hanchacha. Okay? So therefore, says the Rabbi, when it comes to matzah, it's not good enough to have somebody standing over and reminding the kid, because to him it could look like a regular bread baking act. Right? It's not like writing of a get. The writing of a get is a very unusual ceremony. It's a very unusual practice. You take a parchment and you write about so-and-so that's divorcing his wife. So that's why it's good enough to have a gadol and a gabo. But says the Rashi, when it comes to matzah baking, it's not good enough. So according to the Rashba, it's not good enough when it comes to matzah baking to have a gadol and a gabo. So therefore, in the matzah bakeries, they bring bachram, they bring yeshiva bachram to do the matzah baking. So they have to be very careful that, number one, that they're bar mitzvah, and also that they have two pubic hairs. How do we know that? If you already see they have facial hair growing, so then they're a fully bona fide adult. Right? But if they haven't yet, if they don't have the physical features of an adult, right, they're not yet, they haven't gone into puberty yet, they're not valid to bake matzah. Okay, so according to the Rashba, it's very important that when you get yeshiva bracham or whoever you get to bake the matzahs, you have to make sure that they have reached adulthood on a deraisa level, which, as I mentioned, means that they're 13 years old and they also have two pubic hairs. Okay? So that's the ruling of the Rashba. Again, how come, according to the Rashba, to repeat ourselves, why is it that when it comes to get, it's good enough to have a gadol and a gabo, and telling him to do it l'shma? Because Maisa Mechichem Allah, the act of writing the get, stands as a reminder, right? It makes the child or the cherush or the shaita cognizant that he's doing an act for the sake of a mitzvah, whereas the baking of a matzah, you don't have that advantage. Okay? Number 44 on the reference sheet, the Mishnah brings both Shitas and Rishayim. According to the Mishnah, where some Rishayim are makel that it's good enough to have a gadol instructing the child with the shalta that he should do it for the sake of the mitzvah. According to the other Rishayim, it's not good enough. Okay? So therefore, the opponents of the machine matzah, this is what Rav Shlomo Kluger mentioned, and all the other, many of the other poskim that oppose the machine matzah, they all made this point. They said, according to the Rashba, it's not good enough when it comes to matzah. So therefore, since the machine is doing the act, Even though it's being supervised by a Jewish person that's present, it's not good enough. And Rav Shlomo Kluger pointed out it's even worse. Even according to the Rishonim that say Oymed al-Gavul is good enough for a child, that's because you can remind the child. The child has some intelligence. So when you instruct the child, right, you can keep the child cognizant that he's doing it for the sake of the mitzvah. When it comes to machine, right, there's no real intelligence for a machine. A machine doesn't have intelligence, so therefore, if you need lishma, a matzah, a machine cannot achieve the objective of lishma. That's a brief view of the opponents of the machine matzah. I don't understand this at all. I can't for the life of me understand how they could try to promote such an objection. For the simple reason, look at number 45 on the reference sheet. The Gemara Mechulin Daf Tezayin Amar Aleph. Hashem B'Muchni. If somebody shechts an animal using a wheel, shchita seksheira, it's a kosher shchita. Now remember that a shchita is koyach gava. Koyach gava means it comes from the direct force of a human being. And that's what is necessary to make a shchita kosher. So the Gemara says if you use a wheel to shech, it's kosher. Asks the Gemara about Tana Shulub, so we learned exactly the opposite. Right? We said that if you shech with a wheel, the shchita is not kosher. So the Gemara says there's no difficulty. There are two types of wheels. There's one wheel that a blacksmith uses. It has a pedal. So if he's using a wheel with a pedal, so therefore that's called the direct force of the human. Right? The human uses the pedal to move the wheel, so therefore he's considered to have shechted with his force. Whereas if you use a wheel of water, right, it's not your force, it's the force of the water that turns the wheel, and therefore the shechita is invalid.
Force? It's part of the first initial.
Oh, so that's the next, very good. I think that's the next point. The Gemara says sometimes even a water mill or water wheel is kosher. Rashi says that if you open up a dam, right, you let a rush of water come out, right, it says the first turn of the wheel is kosher, right, because you release the water, so the first round, the first rotation of the wheel, right, is kosher to shech the animal. The second rotation is not good enough anymore because that's already two steps removed.
You know that was the first one would happen.
That's right. And that's the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch in 47, right? In the Shulchan Aruch, Nechoshchid, the Siman Zayin, of Aleph, right? It says the Shulchan Aruch, just the second last line, the Sfiva Rishayna, even with a water wheel, if it's the first rotation, then that's called Koach Adam. That's called coming directly from the force of the human being. But once it's the second turn of the wheel, then it's not kosher. But if it's a pedal, it's always kosher. So now, it's very obvious to me that that if you look at the machine matzah, especially the ancient one, it was literally a wheel that she moved with your hand. So how on earth could the opponents of the machine matzah try to suggest that this is not lishma, as if the machine is doing the act? No, it's the person doing the act. I don't understand why would the wheel of the machine matzah be any less than the wheel that's being used for shechita, right? They quoted, the opponents of the machine matzah quoted the Marival, number 49 on the reference sheet, the Marival Simen Kuf Tzadi Gimel, right? It's a chiddush of the Marival. He says that obviously the lisha needs to be done by an adult Jew. That's clear, we've seen that. We've seen that in the Shultas Dolachai. As soon as the water is added, the Marival adds a chiddush. When you shape the dough, it also needs to be done by an adult that is Jewish. Okay, so you need somebody that could make matzah shmura even for the shaping of the dough. So comes with Mordechai Zev Ettinga and says, look, since you need a kosher Jew to do the shaping and the machine is doing the shaping, let's read the whole section of Mordechai Zev Ettinga, the brother-in-law of Rabbi Yosef from Levinson. Ki b'maisa isha masav hagalgal. Mordechai Zev Ettinga assumes that the person that's turning the wheel, right, three times koyach. Right, he says it's 3 steps removed. I don't understand what he means. Why is it 3 steps removed? I don't understand. Rav Shlomo Kluger makes the same point. He doesn't even attempt to substantiate his point. He says it's obvious to me that the matzah that comes from the machine is not matzah l'shma. Comes Yosef Shalom Eidenson and raises the objection that's bothering us. He says, what on earth are you talking about? Number 52 in the reference sheet. Right? It's amazing. As we saw last week how Yosef Shalom Eidenson had such a beautiful pen, and he knew how to use sarcasm to the best, right? He was a great orator. Like, look what he says. He says, I just have to read this entire paragraph, I really enjoyed it. Atuch, number 52 in the reference sheet. Okay, that's Rav Zad Ettinger. Rav Zad Ettinger, I don't understand what Zad is talking about.
The wheel and on the other...
No, I put a little picture. Unfortunately, it's not very clear, but if you look very carefully, you can see, right, at the center of this picture, you can see the wheel. If you look carefully at the bottom, you see the little handle there?
It's talking about the machine wheel or it's about the water wheel?
No, it's talking about the machine wheel. The Mordechai Zev Ettinger claims that the machine matzah that was producing the shape of the dough is koyach, koyach, koyach. It's 3 steps removed, and I don't understand why. Right? Why is it? He's moving a wheel that's moving a rolling pin that's shaping the dough.
He's not constantly moving it.
Maybe he's not constantly moving it, so he moves it and then he lets it roll. Maybe that's what he thought. I don't know. Maybe. But anyways, look at Rav Yosef Shalom said, right? The great defender of the machine matzah. It's beautiful the way he writes. He says, Ad chashav shemashim yesh ligzar ba'atu halayidati masach. I don't know what he's talking about. Ad chashav shemashim asa yesh kishuv. Does he think that the machine is made by witchcraft, by sorcery? Right? Maybe he thinks that the machine is some sort of kishuv. Okay, the electric machine would be something the equivalent of kishuv, okay? But we're talking about a mechanical machine that's being used by gears and what have you. So he says that he must think that it's kishuv, that it's witchcraft that causes the wheel to move. Shemashlichem isa l'sham, like you throw a dough in there, or galgal ma'elav, and it turns by itself. V'noilad, right? Like the egel, you know, Aaron kind of threw the gold into the fire, and all of a sudden the egel popped out. So he says that they think that you throw the dough into the machine, and all of a sudden, kishuv through sorcery, like it happens by itself, and boom, pop up comes a matzah. He said, what are you talking about? Well, there are many people turning the wheel. They make a huge piece of dough. It's a huge wheel with a huge rolling pin, and there's actually few people moving this massive wheel. He says, he says, does the rolling pin in the machine have more intelligence? Right? They think that the rolling pin has like an independent, autonomous intelligence. He says, when you hear their arguments, it brings you to laughter. And their dreams, the dvarav, he says this is dreams, and they think that this is some sort of kishuv, and it causes one to laugh. Okay? I personally don't even understand. Maybe I'm missing something, but it sounds like Rabbi Yosef Shalom is making a very clear point. But in any case, however you look at it, according to Shlomo Kluger and the others, they held that for whatever reason, I don't know how to explain it, they held that the matzah that comes out of the machine is not matzah l'shma. So therefore they come up with the following argument, and they said, since this matzah is invalid for the first night of Pesach, we have to completely forbid it, because even if we make it for the other days of Pesach, this will inevitably lead some people to use it also on the night of Pesach. You follow that? It says we can't allow this use of matzah at all, because even if we produce it for the rest of the days of Pesach when we don't need shmura matzah, but if it goes onto the market, inevitably somebody or some people are going to use it also for Seder night. That's the argument that they made.
That's true.
Huh?
That's probably true.
Now I don't understand. Did you ever find in the Rishayim that a matzah has to be shmura? I remember we quoted the Bahag. What did the Bahag say? The Bahag said you need matzah shmura, but for the first night. The Bahag didn't say you're not allowed to eat matzah, that you're not allowed to have matzah that's not shmura. I'm going to go back on the reference sheet. Look at what the Bahag said. Right? Are they making up a new gzeira? The Bahag clearly didn't agree with this gzeira. Right? If you want to go back to your reference sheet, number 35, says the Bahag, the also the dafka laila rishon. It's only the first night that you can't use this matzah that was made by an eved or a non-kosher actor. It's fine for the rest of the days of Pesach. So I don't understand. According to Rav Shlomo Kluger, why did this Hilchos Gedolah seem to indicate that it's fine for the rest of the nights? According to Shlomo Kluger, you have to completely forbid non-shmura matzah. According to Shlomo Kluger, you're not allowed to sell non-shmura matzah in the stores. Because somebody might use it for the first night.
What's understandable?
But we don't find such a gzeira. You see that the Bahag wasn't concerned for such a possibility. But anyways, Rav Shlomo Kluger was not the only one that made this argument. The Rav of Lublin, Rav Yeshua Heschel Ashkenazi, made the same argument, and he brought an example of where you find such a similar gzeira when it comes to chaylas, the blue dye. Okay, he brings a Gemara in Perek Tcheles. We're going to look at that. It's a Gemara Menachos Daf Mem Aleph that says that if you have a blue garment, you're supposed to have the white strings. Remember that when you put on tzitzis, okay, let's go with the sheet of the Ravid. Okay, 2 out of the 8 strings have to be Tcheles. The other 6 strings have to be white or the color of the beged. At least according to the Rambam for sure. So if you have a red garment, you have 6 strings that are red and 2 strings that are blue. You have a green garment, so 6 strings are green and 2 strings are blue. What happens if you have a blue garment, not made of tcheil, it's made of clay ilan? Okay, indigo. Okay, so you have a blue shirt that's dyed with indigo. So the 6 strings that were normally white, in this case would have to be also indigo. The other 2 strings would have to be proper tcheilus dyed that comes from the snail. Chilazim, correct? So the Gemara, don't do that. Right? Because you have 8 strings, they're all blue. You can't distinguish which strings are tcheilus, which strings are from the indigo plant. What's going to happen is people are going to get mixed up, and people are going to use the indigo strings also for tcheilus. So he wanted this the same thing. Right? If you allow non-shmura matzah to go onto the market, it's going to lead people to use it on Seder night. Everybody understands immediately that there's no comparison. Right? It's not evident immediately what's tcheilus and what's indigo. The Gemara in Menachos there gives a whole bunch of tests. You have to put all sorts of, you have to put aloe and urine. Also, you have to subject to all sorts of corrosive chemicals to determine if the blue was dyed with the indigo or if it was dyed with chilazim. So here, right? Okay, the truth is, you hear the argument. If you look at a piece of matzah, you can't tell if it's shmur or not. I mean, one of the things you see that the matzah was square. Initially, they used to make the matzah. Initially, what they used to do is they wanted the machine matzah to be round because people were used to round matzahs. So they used to cut off the corners, and then they were throwing the dough back in. And they said, okay, that's a real problem. If you throw the dough back in, then things could really become chametz. Because if you remember that this dough gets recycled again and again and again, and then eventually that dough may have been untouched for 18 minutes. So they said, okay, no more adding the corners. They said, make sure it's square. And they made this gzeira to make a distinction. Don't make round matzahs, make it only square, so this way everybody could be rest assured that they weren't throwing the corners back into the machine. Then they came along. One of the Admarim said, ugas matzahs. Ugas matzahs means runged the matzahs. My grandfather used to tell this to me from Presburg. And he used to say he didn't realize that ugas matzahs, right, means the dough. The dough, okay, there's 2 drafts. One Rashi says uga means a charara, which means it wasn't baked in the sun, it was baked in coals. The Rashbam says that any dough that's not baked in an oven, that's baked in the sun or baked on coals, is called a charara. So since the matzahs they took out of Egypt were baked in the sun, it's called a charara. Uga is matzah. So uga means it's an uga, a cake, a pancake that was matzah, that never became leaven. My grandfather had a different interpretation. I don't have time for it. It's a nice interpretation, but I don't really have time for it. So I guess, I suppose, I'm sure I'm not the first person to have said this, that they wanted the matzah to be square to address the concern of Rav Shlomo Kluger and the Rav of Lublin. Okay, that this way everybody sees a square matzah, they won't mistakenly use it for Seder night. Those that don't consider, again, if you consider the machine matzah shmura, then you can use even machine matzah for Seder night. But for those that don't consider the machine matzah shmura, they won't get mixed up. They'll know that if the matzah is square, they should not be using it for Seder night. Okay, part 6 of the machine, right? Number 59, which brings us to the most relevant part of today's shir. That is, what about the electric machines? Okay, so we talked about this briefly in last week's shir. That Mr. Manischewitz, Talmud of Yisrael Salanter, he moved to America, and at about the turn of the century, in the early 1900s, he made many innovations to the industry of machine matzah. Thank you, Ali. He made many innovations into the industry. He improved the industry greatly, and one of the things that he introduced was the electric machine matzah. So he came to the Rav of St. Louis, right, Rav Rosenfeld, and Rav Rosenfeld was one of the very important rabbis in America. Again, we mentioned last week he built the first municipal Eruv in St. Louis. He put out a work which has become almost like a prototype for all future municipal Eruvs. So he wrote to the Divrei Malkiel, okay, He wrote to the Divrei Malkiel, and he asked the Divrei Malkiel, is it okay to use machine matzah that's powered by electricity? And the Divrei Malkiel was machadish that even machine matzah from electric machines is also shmura matzah. That was his chidush. He says pressing the button is good enough. He just said, and now that he proved it, because he said if you don't use the machine matzahs, you're going to have irreligious people, non-observant Jews, doing the matzah. There's a big question: can non-observant Jews, people that don't accept the mitzvah of matzah, could they also produce machine matzah? Could they produce matzah shmura? So he says, the Divrei Malkiel says if you don't use the machine, you're going to have to use non-observant Jews. Then you get into a thorny issue: is the matzah l'shma, is the matzah shmura not? So he says it's better to use the machine, and he ruled that by pressing the machine, since it came as a result of your action, that's also called l'shma. It's also called shmur. Now the truth is, we already saw about the wheel l'shchita, that even if you open up a dam which turns a wheel, we said it's only the first rotation of the wheel that's considered your action. So what's the difference? So the reason they already made a difference, that there's a difference between mitzvah and hechsher mitzvah. There's two things. One is the actual mitzvah itself, and then there's an act which enables the mitzvah. So if you look at the Tzitz Eliezer, number 64 in the reference sheet, the Tzitz Eliezer, it's a little bit of a long piece, you can go through it. The Tzitz Eliezer says that the actual baking of the matzah is not the primary mitzvah, it's the hechsher mitzvah. Right? You cannot eat matzah unless you bake it. So when you bake the mitzvah, Hashem will reward you for your efforts, right? But the objective is to eat the matzah. So it's called a hechsher mitzvah. So therefore, when you do hechsher mitzvah it doesn't have to actually be, it's not the actual Maisa mitzvah, so therefore it's good enough if it happened as a result of your action. As opposed to shchita, shchita is considered the actual mitzvah. It's an actual mitzvah to shech. Even the act of shchita is considered a mitzvah. Yeah, so that's, we have to be more common. Okay? There was an interesting Rabbi from Harnov, he's now a big postic in Lakewood. He introduced a certain system of writing Sefer Torah where they would put a mold over parchment, okay? And they would basically, all the letters of the Sefer Torah, basically they would cut out all the letters of the Sefer Torah, they would put this mold over the parchment, and they would pour the ink. And then the ink would fall into the holes, right, of the cover, and they'd let it dry, they'd pull it off, right, almost instantaneously, or with one act of pouring the dio, you'd be able to produce the Sefer Torah. He wanted to say it's kosher, and it created a huge controversy. Maybe that's a controversy we'll get to one day.
Who's it?
Rabbi Badi. He's a big postic in Lakewood. And he wanted to say that it's a kosher Sefer Torah. And Rabbi Yashuv and Bosner and all the poskim made a massive fuss about it. They made a war against him, and they said, you can't do it, it's not kosher. So I had a friend, David Bradley, once asked me, he said, what's the difference between that and machine matzahs? So I brought in the Be'er Halacha and Siman Lamches. The Be'er Halacha says that writing a Sefer Torah says in the Torah, the act of writing a Sefer Torah is the essential mitzvah. It's not an actual mitzvah. It's the actual mitzvah. If you write a Sefer Torah, you write a mezuzah, you're not just doing something that enables a mitzvah, you're doing the actual essential mitzvah. So since it's the actual mitzvah, it's not just a hechsher mitzvah, right? You have to do something that's mamish your force. Now the truth is, he could argue about it that it is my force. I'm pouring the ink. But Rosh Hashanah is the real reason. That's what the other poskim said. It's not a ma'aseh ksiva. It's not an act of writing. Uchtavta means to write, to shape the letters one by one. But pouring ink, it doesn't fit the definition of uchtavta. It's not called writing. Okay, but in any case,
What was the argument to Rabbi Rashid?
Sorry?
What was the argument, Rabbi Rashid's argument?
Rabbi Yashuv, the main argument of Yashuv is that it's not a ma'aseh ksiva. It's not an act of writing.
Did they have like a template where they cut out?
A template, that's what Rabbi Badi wanted to introduce, a template where they would pour the ink and then it would go into the template. It would obviously make Sefer Torah.
It's a template with writing that you can actually, like the kids do, have
so they make a template and you just fill it in with your hand. That's an idea. I'm a Mashiach, become a millionaire.
Sure.
He's an entrepreneur. And you make a template,
wow,
and it'll make the writing much quicker. You can have inexperienced people. You can just use the template, and they'll just fill in the ink inside the template. Okay, you better get a patent.
Because then you're writing it.
Because then you're actually writing it. How do you on the ball tonight?
Sure, that's
a great idea. So, anyways,
wow.
You better quickly get a patent, because when this goes on YouTube, somebody's going to take the idea. Okay, so basically, if you want to look at the Shutta, you asked about the Ksav Sofer. The Ksav Sofer says they had no choice. It wasn't a question about it. They didn't have the manpower to make matzahs. And if you look at a whole bunch of takamis, you have to have mashgichim, you have to have people overseeing it. If you look at some of the other Talmidim of the Chasam Sofer, the Beis Sha'arim, he writes at the bottom, even though the Divrei Chaim of Tzanz didn't allow it, but we have no choice, what are we going to do? I know the great Divrei Chaim didn't allow it. Basically, in Slovakia and many other places, machine matzah became acceptable. As I mentioned last week, the great person, I suppose, who broke ranks was the Marsham, the great Rosham Shadran, the Galatiano Paisik, that approved the machine matzah. But this is an important point, I'm going to finish with this. According to the Marsham, the only mechanical machines produce matzah shmura. If you want matzah shmura, then you have to use the wheel. Okay. According to him, the electricity is not good enough. So that for today, right, you can buy machine matzah that's made by hand, a hand machine matzah, which means to say it's not electrically powered. So that would be, according to the Marsham, would also be matzah shmura, and that would be seen very reasonable. That I would personally myself rely on that as shmura matzah. With the electricity, it's already more problematic. You can rely on the different makil. I guess in certain places, like in the army, in Chabad, would have starved with 2,000 people that don't have money to buy anything else, then yesh no lemal Glassman. Okay, next week, I think we're going to give a shir on, I did mention I was going to give a shir on it, and I wanted to break a medical business. Somehow we always get back to medical, the whole field of medicine. Medical ethics produces a lot of controversies. We'll talk about surrogate motherhood, okay? Egg donation, okay?
Can I just mention one thing?
Sure.
We baked matzahs in South Africa.
Yeah.
So it was in a very big factory, and they had, it was a major biscuit factory. They had one section once a year where they would do the matzahs, and I was a mashgiach there, not that often, but I was there. And I remember the workers, the non-European workers, they were told that this is a very holy place. If you bring any bread in here, you're fired.
Yeah.
So they said, wow, we entering a very holy place.
We're in a holy place.
And it actually worked.
And that convinced them not to be bread.
And we were the basing would come and check. We would clean all it was done so well. And we baked, there was matzahs in South Africa.
I remember one year we were in Italy for Pesach, and this was a soft opening. It was a brand new resort, an hour away from the area. Beautiful. We met Siti Livni. She rented a little villa there. She wanted to run away from Jews, and then she got a villa right next to a big hotel with from Jews. We were walking on the coast, and then her husband shouted, "Hey, Mashlomcha," and we met Siti Livni. She said she made matzah bride and said her name. I remember there in Italy, it was a brand new golf resort that was like, as they say in Hebrew, right, Hanayron, right? Beautiful place. And I was speaking to the mashgiach there, and the mashgiach was from the Padma family. He was from Manchester. He was the mashgiach there. I was schmoozing with him. He said he had a meeting with the entire kitchen staff, the entire waiting staff. He sat them down and he gave a speech about everything they need to know. He says, listen here, milk and meat, right? It's got to be separate. Separate dishes, separate sections of the kitchen. Milk and meat can't come together during a meaty meal. There's no such thing as serving anything with milk. Okay. So the head waiter said, "Excuse me, sir, I can't comply." He says, "If a person wants a coffee with cream after his meaty meal, right, I have to give it to him." So he says, "You can give him coffee with cream if you just had a meaty meal." So he says, "In this hotel, there is no such thing, right?" He says, "In this hotel, if a guest wants something, right, we have to deliver." So he says, "There's a first for everything." And I remember we were learning the halachas of Bishul Akim Nikolo. So we said anything that's anything that's suitable to be served on the tables of kings, right, presents an issue of Bishul Akim, has to be cooked by a Jew. So we were debating, is cornflakes an issue? Right? Is cornflakes, would you put cornflakes on the table of royalty? So somebody there said that he believes that, according to the London Beis Din, they say anything that's in the Ritz-Carlton of Paris, apparently, this is what I heard, I can't vouch for it, he said anything that goes into the menu of the Ritz-Carlton in Paris is considered Oil Shulchan Malachim. So there was a boy French who says, "Oh really? No problem." He spoke French. He says, looked up on his phone, got the number for the Ritz-Carlton in Paris. He calls him up on the spot and says, it's in French. He said, well, he probably speaks English, whatever, I'm sure the Rabbi language is. He says, look, I'd like to go to stay at your hotel. My kids need cornflakes. Right? Would you serve cornflakes in your hotel? He said, sir, in our hotel, whatever you ask for, we'll get.
Wow.
Okay, so we said, do we have an issue with cornflakes for Bishop? Okay, we'll stop over here. Just want to see if there's any questions from the WhatsApp. Okay, beautiful. Have a good night. Thank you, everybody.
Go ahead.